Hi everybody, welcome to Into the Weeds. We have a kind of a big show today. There's a lot of stuff that's happening. We want to talk about the recent Supreme Court decision that affects federal injunctions. We want to talk about a whistleblower at some point, hopefully, if we have time, named Reveni, who's come out and said some things that are of import. And maybe at some point we might pivot back to the immigration conversation as a whole. To start with, though, let's talk about the decision that just came down. This was today or yesterday, right? I mean, this is
No,
very
today.
it was today, so very recent. As always, I'm gonna let Phil explain the intricacies, and then we're gonna kick back and forth a little bit on whether or not we think this was a good thing, and then we're gonna see if we can tie it into the recent whistleblower that has come out. I forget his first name. What was it? It was Reveni. What was it? Reveni is his
Um,
last name.
yeah,
We'll, but hopefully we'll.
it's an
It
unusual
is an
name.
unusual
So
name. So I'll look that up while you explain to the viewers, Phil, what the Supreme Court.
Erez.
That's
It's
right.
Erez.
Right. Eris.
Yeah.
So I will let you explain to the viewers what the Supreme Court has just decided.
Okay. And I'm gonna try and be as succinct as I can, and also sort of address what the ruling did say and didn't say. So, the case was specifically in response to Donald Trump's executive order, essentially attempting to end birthright citizenship through an executive order rather than a constitutional amendment. The courts didn't rule on the merits of the case. So that's not what they ruled on. What they ruled on was in the case that was dealt with in the lower courts. What the judge did, I think it happened in a couple of jurisdictions, is they issued a nationwide injunction. Basically, a nationwide injunction says, don't implement this policy nationwide. That's something courts have done for hundreds of, over 100 years, but with increased frequency. What the court ruling essentially said was that um, a judge can issue an injunction, and I've heard two different explanations. The injunction could only apply to the people in the case. So, in the case of the people who sued to stop the executive order relating to birthright citizenship, the only the people who are listed as litigants in the case, it would prevent it from carrying it out in regards to them. I've also heard that there are 94 federal district courts, I believe, that a judge can issue an injunction just for their district. So, in other words, the Texas judge in the Western District could issue an injunction that would only apply to the Western District. And so, what it did is essentially removed the power that judges have had for a long time and exercised with increasing frequency, um, stopping policies that they felt were violative of the Constitution. So that's what the ruling actually actually does.
Let me
Um,
see if I can clean it up a little bit for people
okay,
that are not maybe quite so judicially inclined.
okay,
Uh, Basically, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the Supreme Court said that judges are allowed to issue injunctions against particular plaintiffs on behalf of particular plaintiffs or specific people. But federal judges are no longer allowed to issue blanket injunctions against the entire government, right?
right,
A judge cannot, one judge in one particular court cannot make a ruling that affects the entire country. And Coney Barrett, who wrote the majority opinion, basically said that this power to do that the power that a sole federal judge has to shut down a policy across the entire government is just not what the Judicial Act of 1789 was intended to do, right? So that and obviously this is not the argument is not over, right? This is something people are going to continue talking about, but I do think that this prevents forum shopping, judge shopping, which is something that you are surely familiar with. The idea that if you find a federal judge who is in agreement with your particular agenda, that judge on their own, with no assistance from anyone else, can shut down a government policy. And so somebody in a court in, Southern California could stop a law that's affecting, primarily the East Coast. I mean, things like that. It's that kind of forum shopping, I think, is not a great way of using the judiciary. I Anyway, that's my simplification. Am I on target or am I off base?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I think there's the other side of it that I find incredibly disturbing. So first, when a federal judge in Texas, I believe it was, issued a nationwide injunction against President Biden's policy for of student loan forgiveness,
Hmm.
the Biden administration appealed it up to the Supreme Court and wanted them to prevent these nationwide injunctions in particular in relating to this. And the Supreme Court um, didn't go there. They didn't rule on on the use of injunctions. Now, 5 months into the Trump administration, now they've decided to do that. So I find this, the more that the courts look like they're just extensions of political parties, the worse it is for respect for the court. And so I'm deeply troubled by the timing of it. But if you go back to the merits of the case having to do with birthright citizenship, to me, and Jubal might disagree with this is the executive order ending birthright citizenship is blatantly unconstitutional. Blatantly unconstitutional.
I
But what
agree.
that,
I agree.
okay,
I just
oh,
want to put it
good.
out there. Putting it out on
So
Front
what that,
Street, I agree with that.
okay, so what that means though, then, is that a president, in this case Donald Trump, but it will be a Democratic president at some point in the future, can issue an executive order that is blatantly unconstitutional. And now, in order to stop it from being implemented, a judge can't stop it, right? And keep in mind, when you issue an injunction, the only time judges are supposed to issue injunctions, nationwide or otherwise, is when certain thresholds are met, that the merits of the case are such that it looks like they'll prevail, that if an injunction isn't uh, established, that there'll be irreparable harm. So they don't do it willy-nilly. They have to demonstrate that. In any case, what that means now is if we take a look at the birthright citizenship case, depending on how narrow an interpretation of the ruling it is, every single person who could be affected by the executive order, a blatantly unconstitutional executive order, every single person who could be harmed by that will have to find a lawyer, file a suit. Either, if the best case scenario is they would have to do it in all 94 districts, right? And then each judge would have to do a district-wide injunction. That's best case. Or every single litigant would have to be identified and be part of a lawsuit. So you can do something called a class action lawsuit that is really complicated. It just makes it really difficult. What it also does is it creates a situation where a president, and again, everybody should keep this in mind, any president can issue a blatantly unconstitutional executive order, and every person who's affected by that blatantly unconstitutional executive order would have to go to court to have their rights reestablished. The whole point of much of the Constitution is to try and rectify the imbalance of power between a private individual and the national government. Right? National government can bring so much power to bear, and a private individual is just a private individual, even somebody with a lot of money. What this does is it gives the executive branch in particular a ton of power and the ability to act in a way that is what I would call lawless, with some degree of impunity. So here's what I want other people to think about. Imagine a Democratic president who decides that, in the interest of public safety, um, assault weapons are going to be banned. That I believe also is unconstitutional. That would not be a constitutional executive order. You want to amend the Constitution, amend the Second Amendment, that's completely fine. But doing it by executive order would be problematic. It would require, in order for people to have their rights reestablished, every single person who was affected, or they would have to be a litigant, or um, the judges in 94 different districts would have to rule on it. To me, one, that's incredibly inefficient, incredibly inefficient. And so I agree that there are problems with judges doing um, a
Forum shopping.
nationwide, nationwide injunctions. The way they sought to balance that or rectify their concern, to me, um, was over the top. Right now, it looks to me like Congress is not doing anything to restrain the executive branch. What we have now is a Supreme Court that is just like um, removed the sole means by which the judiciary below the Supreme Court can restrain an executive. I think this is a really terrible, dangerous ruling, especially when coupled with the immunity ruling,
Mm.
that the president has a presumption of immunity when he's or she is acting in their capacity. And then I think about, and feel free to jump in because obviously I have a lot to say. Then I think about it specifically in the context of um, immigration and everything that's
Well, let's
going.
let me real quick. Let me
Go
get
ahead.
my two
Yeah,
cents in.
jump in.
I want to pivot back to immigration, but I want to basically say that for the most part, I agree with you. I think that this particular ruling really defanged the judicial branch in a way that we haven't seen before. Now, I will say that in a way, this is kind of this was telegraphed because something like 2/3 or 3/4 of all the federal injunctions that have ever been filed in the history of America have been filed against Donald Trump, right?
I
So
don't know
it's
what I don't know what conclusion you draw from that. I have a
what
feeling that
I
the
understand
conclusion you would draw and the one I would draw are
are
very
very
different.
different. I think the conclusion that you would draw is, well, it's because he's done so much wrong stuff, right?
Correct. He's done things that are
Uh,
lawless. Right.
so that's that's one argument. The other argument is that this is a concerted strategy, that the injunction strategy, that the forum shopping and the judge picking to shut down facets of the Trump administration has been an ongoing and strategic effort by the left, by the political left in this country. Um, and it
Except that
has
the judge.
been
Okay, can I just say, but the judges who've been have issued these injunctions have not all been on the left. That's
okay.
a very easy way to fall
Well,
back onto
let's
things and
say
try and well, wait to try and turn it into something political. But that's basically not true, Jubal.
let's say
It's been
it's
Democratic, Republican judges, and it's been judges appointed by Donald Trump himself.
okay. Okay. So let's say pro-Trump and anti-Trump then, right? Because the whole concept of left and right are a little bit up in the air with Donald Trump because he's not the most conservative Republican that has ever served in office.
Wait,
But there are certainly let me finish my point.
okay, go ahead.
There are camps. There is a pro-Trump camp and there's an anti-Trump camp. The pro-Trump camp consists of a mixture of Republicans, Democrats, and independents. The anti-Trump camp is the same. So it doesn't really break along party lines. There are Republicans who are aligned against Trump. There are Democrats who are aligned in favor of Trump. And so it's to say that it's you're right in this sense. I shouldn't have said that this is left versus right. This is pro-Trump versus anti-Trump, right? The pro-Trump elements of the government are behind him, of course, and the anti-Trump elements of the government are committed to doing whatever that they can to stop him, right?
So let me ask you a question. In that breakdown, um, the thing I find problematic with that is that means that any judge who rules against Donald Trump is an anti-Trump judge.
No,
What
not
that also
necessarily. Not
what that
necessarily.
also means is that there are anti-Trump judges who he nominated to the bench.
Sure.
Okay, so to me, even using the pro-Trump, anti-Trump framework does like a disservice to the truth.
Okay.
That's not the case,
That,
right?
fine.
I would
Let me,
argue it's pro-constitutional and anti-constitutional, or
right.
it's pro-executive power versus skepticism about executive power. That there are other ways to break it down, but to turn it into a pro-Trump, anti-Trump thing, to me, does a real injustice to what I think judges try and do.
Hmm.
So, anyways, I'll just continue on then.
So my point is only this, that if on a particular issue, like say, the use of the Alien Enemies Act, let's say for immigration, prior to this ruling from the Supreme Court, what the Democratic Party would do is find a judge in some district anywhere across the country who agrees with their position that the AEA should not be used for immigration, and that judge can then issue an injunction that shuts down the use of that across the country, right?
Right.
And whatever policy you have, you can find a judge somewhere that will agree with the Democrats' position on it, issue an injunction, and shut that down. And that has happened again and again and again and again. This isn't something that it's just happened a couple of times. Like I said before, the majority of the injunctions since the birth of this country that have been filed against one president, Donald Trump. Now,
One president who is lawless.
I understand.
You know what? I've never gone to court for a criminal conviction. I
Hmm,
know that there are people who've been charged with numerous crimes, right? You know why? Because they broke the law.
okay.
So there's oh, look, I've been charged with 25 different crimes. It's like, yeah, you fucking broke the law. That's why I've never been charged with a crime.
Hmm.
So then you can repeat that statistic all you want outside of the context of why they've been, um, so many injunctions have been issued. Um, it is a point, to me, it is a pointless statistic. He has engaged in ways that have expanded executive power in ways that we have never seen before,
Okay.
right? So
And
I
we've
think,
also never seen this many injunctions against a single president before.
well, you wouldn't see injunctions against a president who's engaging in lawful behavior. We have
Right.
seen
So
injunctions.
what illegal
The minute you get
activity
the
has
Prestone,
what
um,
what laws has this administration broken?
I think they've acted lawless in a number of ways. I think the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act was lawless,
Okay,
right?
but that's
I think them going after individual law firms and individual lawyers has
hmm.
been lawless,
Have they
right?
been found? Has this administration been found to have broken the law anywhere?
What has happened is that there have been injunctions as courses
It's a yes or
cases
no
have made their
question.
way
So
through.
it's this is a yes or no question.
They the, because it's only 5 months old, the administration, a lot of these cases have not been resolved.
Okay.
And I'm happy to wait for the judicial process to work. That's the way it works. But to me, like the executive order ending birthright citizenship, that's lawless.
Hmm.
That's straight out lawlessness. And I think he knows it. Well, I don't
I
know
would
what he
say
knows,
let
but
let's say
but
this. Instead of using the word lawless, which is a word that I don't understand what that word means. Let's say that's unconstitutional. No, I agree with you.
I'm using them synonymously.
Okay, so lawless means unconstitutional.
Yeah,
Okay. So I agree with you that ending birthright citizenship by executive order is unconstitutional, right? It's clearly in the Constitution. You don't get to just issue an executive order that ignores the Constitution. You just don't get to do that, right? Now, this administration is trying to do that because they think that that's an effective way to increase their deportation efforts. That needs to play out, and I agree with you. Like for the most part on this issue, I think you and I are in agreement. I think that this ruling by the Supreme Court is very well could end up doing more harm than good. However, keeping things going the way that they were going was also doing more harm than good, in the sense that, judges, any federal judge at any moment could universally and unilaterally stop the Trump administration from doing something. That's not really fair. This situation, again, not really fair. So maybe the best thing to do is to think about what is the next step now. So this is a precarious moment. Let's agree, right? This is a precarious moment where the judiciary is not going to be able to effectively protect people as well as it could before, but it also cannot weaponize injunctions, right? So that's a big negative, but that's also a significant positive. So what is the next step? My thinking is, what if we have specifically, injunction courts, where you have, let's say, three judges get together, and make decisions on whether or not an injunction can be supported universally. I mean, let's talk about a little bit about solutions. I understand what your problems are with this, because I agree with the problems that you have. What's the next step? And could Congress do something that would solve this problem? I think that they could. I think that they could address this directly and solve this problem within the next few months, if they had the wherewithal.
I don't think they have the political will to do so. But so before we go back to solutions, I just want to talk about one other thing, specifically in regards to immigration. And that is that because of this ruling, like I said, anybody who is subject to a deportation order, abducted off the streets by ICE, whatever,
Abducted, really?
yeah, 100%. Masked
Okay.
men showing up and grabbing people, 100%. A
All right.
guy, a gardener who's lived in his community for 40 years, he's here
Mm-hmm.
illegally, right? Has two sons in the military now, serving now. One
Mm-hmm.
son who's a veteran. He's abducted by ICE and carted away. Yeah, that looks like an abduction to me. Um, it looks like what you see in foreign countries.
Mm-hmm.
People masked up. Yeah,
Why are
those
they
are
wearing masks, Phil? Why are ICE
because they
agents
don't,
wearing
I think because
masks?
they don't want to be held accountable
ICE
for
agents
their
are wearing
actions.
masks because they receive death threats
Police officers
from.
don't wear masks.
Some do.
FBI doesn't wear masks.
So yeah, but they're also not being targeted by activists right now, right? Not as much.
You
Look,
know what? To me,
if ICE agents,
I don't want government officials who have the legal right to use force
the FBI, by the way,
being
does wear
able to
masks.
hide their faces so they can't be held accountable for their actions.
I don't think
I
that's why
want
they're hiding their
I want
faces.
them to be worried about engaging in activity that is unlawful.
Hmm.
But if they're masked up and they're not identifying themselves, this isn't the United States. This isn't the way things have done. And again, under no other president, including those who deported millions of people, did they ever engage in this kind of activity. But let's get back to immigration. My other concern is that if you're somebody who is threatened with being deported and you file a lawsuit or you want to file a lawsuit to protect your rights, so now you have to go to a court. Courts can't issue preliminary injunctions, right? And so now you have to go to court. So who would have standing in a case like this? A pregnant, undocumented female whose baby is going to be born. He could, in theory, hire a lawyer if she had the money, and go through the process of filing a lawsuit. But we already know that what ICE is doing is going to courthouses and grabbing people who are showing up according to the immigration rules, showing up for their asylum hearing. They walk out of the court case and then they're grabbed and taken away. So now the concern is, if I'm worried about my kid, I'm an undocumented pregnant woman, which I'm not, by the way. If I'm if I want to, am I going to go to court to try and vindicate my rights to ensure that I have judicial process? If I know that as soon as I get there, the federal government will say, we want to drop, we're not going to challenge this case. and then as soon as that person walks out, they're taken away by ICE. Then on top of that, we know that Donald Trump has issued a number of executive orders going after lawyers and law firms who challenged him during his 2024 election. How many of those lawyers are going to be willing to do pro bono work if they know that if he gets a hair up his ass, he's going to issue an executive order directed at them? What this does to the rule of law and the administration of justice is deeply, deeply problematic, deeply problematic. And for all those conservatives and Trump supporters who are cheering this on, wait until a Democrat is in there. Wait until the Democrat uses those same kind of powers to implement policies that you disagree with. There are checks and balances in the system. When a judge issues an injunction, they don't do it willy-nilly. Judges don't like to be overturned. You can ask for, and the government has frequently done it, ask for an expedited review by an appeals court. If the appeals court upholds the injunction, then they can get an expedited review to the Supreme Court. There are checks and balances into the system. They're not doing this willy-nilly. All those checks have been taken away. All those checks have been taken away except one, and that is you can do a class action lawsuit, but it's very complicated. What this has done to the rule of law is tremendously problematic.
I don't disagree that it is problematic. I think, though, that it is also problematic that forum shopping has been such a consistent strategy. So what do we do?
Oh, okay. In terms of solutions, I mean, to me, I would prefer to keep things the way they are. And if there needs to be a way to expedite review of nationwide injunctions, in other words, if I don't think Congress.
Okay, well, we're not going to keep things the way they are because the Supreme Court has made a decision, right?
Right. So the idea would be that if the process, that if they sped up the process by which, if nationwide injunctions automatically, you didn't have to appeal a decision. If a nationwide injunction automatically got expedited review, then that might aid the process. The protections are still there.
Okay, no, so that's an interesting idea. So let's say that injunctions, and Congress could do this.
Right.
They come out and they say you can still issue nationwide injunctions, but any nationwide injunction automatically has an expedited appeal to the Supreme Court. Let's say, right?
No, they can't do it to the Supreme Court.
Or okay, to the district court, whatever, like whatever court you could set up.
Court of Appeals.
Right. So
but they can't. Congress can't mess with the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. That's specified in the Constitution.
Right. Okay.
The appeals court, they can't.
So we could set up. You could set up an injunction court. Again, this is. I go back to the idea of an injunction court, which is, let's say, respected judges, 3-5 respected judges. That's obviously subordinated to the Supreme Court, but that specifically handles injunctions. Right. That is their task. That's what they're tasked with, is to review injunctions. I think if you were to get 3 to 5 respected jurists on a panel like that, that it would alleviate, I think, a lot of the problems that people on the center right have with this overuse of injunctions against Donald Trump. Right. That's like, okay, we have this court, this specific court that's empowered with handling this. And again, that establishing that is something that the Congress could do tomorrow if they wanted to, right? I mean, and you say the Congress is not doesn't have the gumption to make anything happen. There's some truth to that. They're certainly dragging their feet. But if something like that was to happen, do you think that would be a fair compromise?
Hold on.
Oh, holding on. Had a brief interruption there. We learned that Governor Newsom is suing Fox for $700 million for defamation. No idea what it's about, but I bet that's going to be our next topic. Going back to,
it's very hard to get a defamation suit when you're
right.
a public figure.
That's true. So, because especially when you're a politician, right?
You don't have to prove that they said something untruthful, you have to prove that they knowingly said
Right,
something untruthful.
right. It was their intent to
So
deceive.
we'll see how that goes. There's a
We'll see
lot
how
of
that
pretty.
goes. But going back to the idea of the injunction court, is that, in your estimation, do you think that would be a fair
I mean,
compromise?
I think for me that would depend on who was on the court. I mean, if it got staffed with a bunch of
So
um,
suppose it's you have the Judiciary Committee nominate, let's say, two conservative and two progressive judges, and then those four judges elect the fifth.
well, I mean, I wouldn't trust this particular Congress to nominate Democratic judges, quite frankly.
Hmm.
Um, and when I see some of the people that Donald Trump has appointed to judgeships, in particular Emile Bove, I don't trust his ability to pick competent people. So I think for
Except for
me,
except for the people who file injunctions against him, the ones that he nominated to file injunctions against him, they're competent.
no, again, I don't know. I don't know all the people who filed injunctions against him. I generally, as an institutionalist, trust the courts to make decisions based on the rule of law. I think there's only one judge that I think really ran afoul of their responsibilities, and that was Judge Cannon in Florida. She was, to my estimation, in the bag for Donald Trump and ruled accordingly. Aside from that, judges have been the sort of the vanguard for, like protecting rights, and so I trust the process. So I would be more inclined for Congress to speed up, to have it be that not that somebody has to appeal um, uh, a nationwide injunction, that they all get automatic, expedited review by the appeals courts.
But they're
And
not
so
implemented until after the review.
um,
Meaning
it would depend on how quickly the
the
process takes.
solve
But
look
if they could
this
limit it to if they could limit it to days, then perhaps that would be okay.
okay. So there's two problems that are happening, right? The first is the courts have been defanged, and now the complete absence of injunctions creates a kind of, like I said before, a very precarious situation as far as rule of law is concerned. But the second thing is I think that certainly the center right of this country, and I think the great majority of American people, are not on board with a single judge making a decision that affects the entire country. I think that is an outsized use of judicial power. And so, I guess ultimately my position is, I agree with this decision, but I don't like the situation that it creates.
And for me, I would say first, in terms of public opinion, the vast majority of people have no opinion on nationwide injunctions because they just don't pay attention to process things. So that would be my
I don't know. I
guess.
think people are smarter than you think. I
Uh,
think, and I think if you break it down and you explain and you say, look, a judge, any federal judge, has the power to shut down, an entire operation of the entire
Oh,
government, the entire federal government.
I think you could ask a question that would get a negative response. But in
That's
terms of
not, but that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if
if
you
you
were
just
to,
ask people how they feel about federal judges issuing nationwide injunctions, I think people would, again, I think most people would have no idea what you meant,
mm,
right? And second, um, people tend to support nationwide injunctions when they disagree with the policy being
right,
implemented, and
sure,
oppose
sure,
it when they support the policy being
right,
implemented. So I
of
think
course,
people are very selective.
of course.
Um, so that would be my preferred response. I don't think the court needed to go as far as they did.
Mm,
And so I worry about the combined impact that this is all going to have in terms of the growth, something that you and I have talked about. We both expressed concern about the growth of executive power.
hmm.
This um, adds and creates an even more powerful executive.
I would say, um, in a sense, yes, it doesn't necessarily give the government more power. What it gives the government is less accountability.
No, it does give them more power because the president can now issue an executive order knowingly, a blatant that is violative of the Constitution, and it requires now uh, either coming up with a class action lawsuit, which is a really
No,
difficult,
I understand, and I don't want to repeat the
or going to every single court in the country
right.
and every litigant. That is deeply problematic.
I
So
understand.
presidents literally don't have to worry about um,
I mean,
about
they
the
look, they do though. Even if Donald Trump,
why
let's say, because if
why
Donald Trump was to, let's say, force through this anti-14th Amendment, constitutional issue, and say, I'm going to deport people that were born in this country, even though, I'm just not going to consider them citizens, that there will be a political price to pay for that. That is not something that's just going to happen under cover of darkness, and it's never going to be revisited again. If
so the
if
whole
if this presidency knowingly engages in unconstitutional activities and thinks that, well, we'll never be held accountable for it.
what if you're a second term president?
Yeah, that's a fair point, right? Fair
So
point.
if you're a second term president,
Hmm.
right, you can go ahead and issue executive orders now that are lawless, that violate the Constitution. And it requires a huge concerted effort across the entire country to prevent it from harming people. The whole point of a preliminary injunction is to prevent irreparable harm from being damaged,
Hmm.
from irreparable harm,
From being done,
right?
right?
And from being done. What this does is it makes the individuals who are hurt, it makes their task so much more difficult. The very thing the framers were concerned about, the imbalance of power between the private individual and the federal government, has just been completely put out of whack by virtue of this decision. And like I said before, don't want to repeat myself, when you combine that with the presumption of immunity when a president is acting in their capacity as president,
Hmm.
um, the power of the executive has just grown enormously as a result of these decisions. And that, as somebody who's always been concerned about the growth of executive power, um, is a very, very dangerous turn of events.
Hmm. So
So
again, Phil and I are in agreement that this is a precarious situation that has been created by this decision from the Supreme Court. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. And do you have any thoughts on solutions that you want to get out there before we see how this develops?
no, and I haven't really I'm still reeling from the decision, so I haven't really thought about. Well, I've been thinking about the implications of the decision itself,
Right.
um, and so maybe we'll revisit that later on.
Okay. Let's call it here, and then we can do. Our next one. We're gonna talk about Ravenny
Yeah,
and his whistleblower stuff. So tune in next time for that. That'll be it for us this time. But keep your
and
eye.
for the few people who get this reference, I'm alarmed by how much I look like Lawrence Tribe because I because I think he's like 89 years old or something. So,
I
anyways,
think
I'm looking at myself going, holy
you're wearing
crap,
another good looking
there's
shirt
one.
today. You're really
Pardon
showing
me.
me up. Your shirts. Look at your shirt. You just got this. You got this nice cut on it. I look
I
like
think that's
crap.
what made the hair look that much whiter. So, anyways,
All right, tune in next time. We're going to talk about some more interesting stuff, and keep your eye on injunctions, on what happens with injunctions here. I think we're going to see some big things happening in the near future. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.
take care.